Okay.
All right, we are live. Welcome to the Barely Protestant YouTube channel. I am Father James, and I have a guest with me today. His name is Nathan. He is an attorney. And what kind of law do you practice?
I practice corporate immigration law, so
Corporate immigration law.
I basically assist companies, the universities, various institutions in the U.S. with through the visa process, kind of bringing over foreign workers for various positions, green card, sponsorship, that sort of thing.
I didn't even know that was a thing. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
It's actually it's the area of federal law that they say famously rivals the U.S. tax code for complexity. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Wow. I was actually going to be in constitutional law. That's what I wanted to get into, but I ended up not doing that at all. And I actually wanted to go into politics. That was why.
Oh.
That was why I wanted to go into law. But anyway, the episode today, I've done quite a few with Roman Catholics and all that sort of stuff, and I wanted to do this one today for a particular reason. So, when I started this channel last year, well, not started this channel last year, but when I started really like heavily producing from it and everything last year, I would get a lot of Roman Catholics who would make a lot of these same exact types of arguments of, if Anglicanism is the true church, why Henry VIII? Why are you going to follow someone who is an adulterer, or this or that, or whatever? And constant, just sort of, I guess, at best, sort of miscommunication between Roman Catholics and Anglicans, and at worst, it tends to be rather insulting and very ignorant accusations and claims made. So I've done videos before on where I sort of respond to some of these things, but you were one who was actually far more cordial. But
Thank you.
but you gave a lot of and this is not sort of a disrespect, but a lot of the sort of common arguments that are made against us as Anglicans. So I figured, hey, you know what? He seems pretty nice. I might as well have him on, and decided to have you on to sort of shoot me with those questions, because the selfish reason for me to do this is that anytime someone who is a Roman Catholic comes onto my channel and does sort of the usual arguments and comments, I'll just be like, here's this video, watch this, please. So yeah. Hopefully that will help out. So anyway, let's just get right into it, unless you had anything you wanted to say starting before or anything.
Sure. No. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This is a real treat. So I look forward to it as well. I don't intend it to be necessary, but I'm hoping more for kind of a cordial conversation back and forth thing. I'll endeavor to continue to be cordial, and also I will try not to, as I told someone else who I think may be watching the broadcast as well, I'll try to not commit any sort of formal heresy while I'm at it. So we'll see if we can set the bar at least at that level for me. So yeah.
All right, if I can, I'm not going to name the person, but I wanted to give it one that just happened today, like literally a few minutes before we got here. I want to give one example. This one was not directed towards me; it was directed towards somebody else. This is sort of the type of thing I'm talking about. It's responding to about a debate or a debate. Someone saying you need to do this sort of debate instead. Do one with some Catholics sometime, especially the one concerning the Protestant Reformation. You know, the timeline like 1500 AD that we reject, Roman Catholics. I've never been able to get a clear understanding on that. 33 AD versus 1500 AD. All of my studies indicate Martin Luther was a heretic, just like King James. It's still the oldest debate in history, Catholicism versus Protestantism. That's sort of the mindset that a lot of people can go, that Roman Catholics think, well, we self-identify as people who started in the 1500s, and we just sort of decide to start a new church and all that sort of stuff. When whether or not that's true, we'll have the debate, obviously, but our position is very obviously that we don't think that. When whether or not that's the case is the debate. But anyway, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and clean I think I have a fingerprint on it or something. How embarrassing. All right, so go ahead and start. Yeah,
sure. Well, I think that's a good place to start, really. was kind of, for me, some of those history questions. But I was curious, actually, a little bit before that, as to maybe a brief little bit of background of your history, a little more recent history.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious as to, how, if your background, if you grew up in the Anglican Communion, or if you have. I myself am a convert to the Catholic Church. I was raised in a fairly, what most people would call fundamentalist kind of Baptist background. Um, and so I entered the church in April of 2011. So I was curious if you have spent any other, any time in the sort of the larger sea of Protestantism and other, maybe Presbyterian or other denominations before finding your way into Anglicanism.
Yeah, so I actually started off independent fundamental Baptist myself.
Okay.
And
Wow,
around the same time
we're
is
very similar in that background. Yes,
yeah.
it was also independent. They were, the churches I grew up in, the faith communities were very proud of saying they were, not affiliated with any other Baptist or any other sort of,
Oh yeah.
communion or group. Yeah.
Were you sort of the Jack Hyles type of fundamentalist, or were you more Pensacola Christian College, or more Bob Jones University? What was your fundamentalist camp? Do you?
That'd be hard to pin down. I think that we're talking West Virginia is where I was actually born. I've managed to lose the accent along the way, which I'm happy about. But that area and Ohio, southeastern Ohio, kind of that Ohio River Valley area, I think a lot of the Baptist communities there are pretty much what they would consider themselves probably very down the line, and in some ways somewhat Calvinist leaning. I mean, there's a very strong
interesting. Okay.
predestination and that sort of thing, as opposed to kind of the free will Baptist sort of outlook of some other groups. Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in a very anti-Calvinistic fundamentalist Baptist upbringing. So yeah, that one is actually a somewhat more of a respectable fundamentalist Baptist, the quote Reformed type, although I wouldn't really call them Reformed. But yeah, we're in slightly different camps with that. But yeah, both fundamentalist.
I think they would think of themselves that way. My father, I think, famously, he's fond of saying that calling himself a Puritan. He really likes the
interesting. Okay,
Puritanism. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up independent fundamental Baptist. My father was a fundamentalist Baptist preacher, pastor. My earliest memories are at the Bible college that he went to. He started going to Bible college when I was about 9 months old. I went to college, fast forwarding quite a bit, jumping a few years, and sort of was an agnostic there because of just life and different issues and all that sort of stuff. So I decided to sort of reconstruct my faith and figure out, do I still believe I'm a Christian, or am I even, do I even believe in God anymore, or anything like that? So that brought me to the liturgical sacramental tradition. So I fell in love with Eastern Orthodoxy at that time. And at one point, this was in 2011 or the end of 2011 to 2012, I was really drawn to the Eastern Orthodox tradition. But the more I studied, the more I realized I still had a lot of Protestant fundamentals, not fundamentalists, but fundamentals to the faith. And so part of that included the idea that I could not join a group like the Eastern Orthodox or Roman Catholics that would that was very exclusionary to the idea of anyone outside of our particular group is not part of the church. And I chalk that up to my dislike for that in the independent fundamental Baptist world, because they made the same claim similarly.
Sure, that you hear that.
So yeah, so for me, I was like, I don't find that biblical. I find the points of orthodoxy are particular beliefs that we find in the Bible, and also the patristics as well. I would extend it to the patristics when it comes to consensus beliefs. But so baptism is the sign of our union with Christ. So we are part of the church via baptism. If they recognize our baptism, they should recognize us as either as like heretics or people have apostatized for particular reasons, not just because we're not in their communion. But that's something we can get into eventually. But anyway, so I was looking for something sacramental and liturgical. but still Protestant. So that left me with Lutheranism and Anglicanism, and I was convinced of apostolic succession. So I ended up becoming Anglican because in the United States, at least, Anglicanism has retained, well, I would say worldwide Anglicanism has retained apostolic succession, but Lutherans have not in the United States. They've done so in parts of Europe, but not in the United States. So that's how I became Anglican.
Okay. Yeah, Orthodoxy and Eastern Orthodoxy in many ways, I think, is quite attractive as well. I mean, it was something that I looked into too. I found it. There's a cultural, I think, kind of a barrier to Eastern Orthodoxy. In so many ways, they are often very identified with a nationality, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, and so forth. So that's one interesting thing. But there you also have some differences, even theologically, between them and what Protestants and Catholics share. With things like somewhat of a different understanding of the whole original sin sort of a thing, some things like that are kind of different.
Yeah, and that was an issue for me too, because I was still very Western in my theology.
Yeah.
So during that Reconstruction time, I was going to all these different college groups, the Roman Catholic college group, Eastern Orthodox, a Methodist one. I was going like every single night of the week, going to a different one. And so I got to learn a lot about a lot of the denominations. I did a lot of studying. In fact, my friend who did this with me, he became Eastern Orthodox. He and I every Sunday would go to a different denomination, and we would call it church clubbing. We would visit different denominations. Sometimes we went literally on one weekend. A few times we'd go to like 3 different denominations. It would be like SDA, Seventh-day Adventists on Saturday. And then we'd go to like 2 different denomination services, like Methodist or Disciples of Christ or whatever. We went to dozens, and we did that for quite a few months. It was really fun.
Okay.
But the Antiochian Orthodox actually are pretty open to those who are not, say, Greek or Russian or whatever. They're ones that have been really open, and that's what I was looking at when I was looking at Eastern Orthodoxy.
And I do know that they also have now. There is an American, Orthodox Church, kind of official
OCA. Yeah,
they're not necessarily easy to find. It depends on where you are in the country. I believe there's one around me. I live in the Detroit area, Michigan, the greater Detroit metro area. I think there are some around here, but it's not something you're likely to find just everywhere. Yeah. So, well, in getting into the history of things a little bit, I guess. One thing I did want to mention just before kind of moving in there, though, because you kind of mentioned this, the whole heretic or baptism thing. I think the Catholic understanding would be a little bit more nuanced than that, certainly. I mean, particularly after Vatican II, which has received praise and criticism depending on who you are. I mean, I think they really attempted to clarify there that other fellow Christians who are baptized in the Trinitarian formula are considered brothers and sisters in Christ. They would be considered in a sense by their baptism to be Catholic, but separated brethren, I believe, is the Vatican II term. Heresy is not something that would be applicable to my family, to other people who are outside the church. Formal heresy being something they would have said was committed by the specific reformers themselves, people like John Calvin and so forth. So
so it would be the original people who left away from the faith. But there are issues. It becomes a bit more murky, and you can't deny also, like what Vatican I says, or Lumen Gentium itself, which does put the what's the other one from the 11th century, Unum Sanctum. These documents do make very strong statements about who is within the church and who is not within the church, and we are defined as not within the church. Because even by our baptism, we are not within the church, and it's not. I don't think we can have a sort of murky, like Bishop Barron type thing with it. No offense to Bishop Barron. I like him in many ways, but he, like, we're not in the church. I'm not allowed to receive communion at a Roman church like that. I'm not allowed to because I'm considered not in the church by your standards. So for me, it's sort of, and like, except for rare occasions, of very, very rare occasions, I'm considered hellbound, like by official canon law of Rome.
No, well,
So go ahead.
again, there. I mean, even Vatican II. I mean, which again we get into very nuanced and somewhat murky territory here, but even the atheist, as Pope Francis and others have said, may through invincible ignorance and so forth may attain salvation. I mean, nobody would. We wouldn't want to rush to judgment about anyone in particular to say they're absolutely they're on the outs. I mean, that's
But it's definitely leaning one direction, though. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's I would say, and this is a bit of the history of it, but I think it comes to that that old outside the church there is no salvation. Extra ecclesiam nulla salus, which was something that was uttered by the Pope at the time, again to the specific reformers that were leaving, formally breaking. So but
I'm also pointing to Unum Sanctum. Trent says similar stuff, obviously, which is what you're referring. But then the First Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council, also Lumen Gentium. These all reiterate the idea. The Roman position is that the standard approach is that I am not part of the church, which is why I can't receive communion. That's the whole point, because I'm not allowed to receive communion. I'm not in the church.
But I think with regards to communion, it would be that receiving communion is a testament that you are in agreement with, that you're in communion with what the church teaches, and that's the idea there. Typically, which this doesn't, I think, which is one of the things we're going to get into, but I think this doesn't apply to you in your position, but for the larger kind of most Protestants that we would think of, that you are saying in receiving communion, I believe that this is what the church teaches which is that it is the body and blood of Christ. And so if you don't, which goes back to St. Paul, of course, in First Corinthians, if you fail to perceive the body and blood, you eat and drink judgment on yourself, that sort of thing. So
there's that issue.
I realize it does seem, yes, it does seem, looking at it as exclusionary, or
And the problem is not necessarily that it's exclusionary. Everyone is exclusionary to one extent or another. Pretty much everybody. Probably everybody. The issue is the way I see it as not being sort of a patristic or biblical understanding of what those boundaries are. So I see within the scriptures, I see baptism being the mark of our union with Christ, and therefore our being part of the body of Christ. Now, heresies can, to an extent, there are different levels of heresy, and the word heresy itself is a little bit wide. It can mean quite a few different things, even within the patristics. But there is a point of heresy and sin that cuts you off from the body. We would both agree on that. But then the question is, though, so for instance, I do hold to the real presence. I believe that I believe in what's called sacramental union, that the bread and wine are joined to the body and blood of Christ. So under the forms of bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ are present, genuinely present.
Yes.
So I would not agree, though, with transubstantiation for particular reasons, which we can get into later if you want to or not.
Sure.
But my position that I just espoused would deny me communion at a Roman church. Even if I were Roman Catholic, even if everything else I agreed with, I could not receive the Eucharist if I held to the position I hold to right now. But even if I held to transubstantiation, and everything else was the same right now, I could not, because I do not hold to the Bishop of Rome as having Vatican I level powers of in his office, and I don't even necessitate I don't even necessarily disagree with the primacy of Peter.
Yes, these were absolutely things I wanted to hope we would have time to get into a little bit, because that is.
But anyway, so I want you to kind of lead this conversation, though. Sorry, I'm trying not to lead it.
Oh, sure, no, sure. So I mean, I think again, so history-wise, going back, I guess a little deeper, historically, I was curious first of all to hear your thoughts then about um, how you would define Anglo-Catholic specifically within the Anglican communion at large, larger Anglicanism, as well as kind of the history of it, the formation or the beginnings of the English Church. With this in mind, even before Henry VIII, because I know that there at least have been some veins of thinking within Anglicanism of kind of an idea of sort of an even earlier English Church, like going back to Saint Alban or Joseph, by tradition Joseph of Arimathea and or Saint Cuthbert later, these sorts of people that they would have held. I think at the time of the Reformation, there may have been some people who certainly wrote this, put forth this idea that there was an English church that sort of grafted onto Rome, and then now we're leaving. So yeah.
So the way that works out is this. One second. First, it's important to understand the mindset of the Protestant reformers. They were not trying to start their own churches. They consciously were not trying to do that. Even if you look at Henry VIII, who breaks away from the Bishop of Rome, he is literally only saying that the Bishop of Rome has no jurisdiction over the church in England. And that's actually a more historic position. And we can go back and forth on the issues and debates there. But you see the king or the emperor having a very strong hand in the local church under his kingdom. You see this with when it comes to, the Fifth Ecumenical Council, the emperor arresting Pope Vigilius. And telling him, no, your heresy is not allowed. You need to accept the Fifth Ecumenical Council. Well, he didn't call it the Fifth Ecumenical Council, but you need to reject, I think it was monothelitism. And basically forces him to hold to reject monothelitism.
It was monophysitism, which is definitely, this is one of the areas I wanted to get into. It was
I thought
Vigilius was the three chapters, and it dealt with monophysitism, which is interesting.
I thought it was monothelitism, but okay, that's fine.
Yeah, monothelitism came in a bit later with Pope Honorius I. So,
that's right, the Sixth Ecumenical Council. Okay,
yeah. So I was just curious. So do you see then at least do you agree that at least the beginning of the English Church was that it from the start Christianity in England was begun by Catholic missionaries and so forth, from whether we go back to St. Patrick going to Ireland and so forth or not.
Well, and that was the other part. So if you read the reformers, the Protestant reformers, they are constantly there's a reason. So I'm going to do 5 different things at the same time. So whenever I have dialogue or talk with, whether it's in the comments section or interviews or whatever with Roman Catholics, I always point out that I never just call you guys Catholic. I always say Roman Catholic, Romanist, other things like that. And it's not because I'm trying to be insulting. It's because our theology says, at your best, you're not the only part of the Church Catholic. And at your worst as Roman Catholics, you're rejecting Catholic theology. All right? We, as Anglicans, consider ourselves Catholic. In fact, every Sunday we espouse, confess the Nicene Creed. We believe in one Catholic and Apostolic Church. It's in there. So if you read the Reformers, they are constantly using the word Catholic as a positive. They are never saying like, oh, those Catholics, we don't want to be Catholic. We want to reject Catholics. Like, no, that's why they use words like papist or Romanist. They're not just trying to be, it's not polemical. Although, I mean, there might be polemics in it.
For them, it was polemical, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
but like, okay, whether or not it was polemical, the point though was that they're saying you're either not Catholic or you're not the fullness of the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
They're making a point in that we are saying we are Catholic, and we are saying at best you guys are also Catholic, and at worst you're not at all Catholic. So that was the debate. So sure. I would say, with all that understood, I would say that we have apostolic succession, and we can get into that also.
Yeah.
But so we're just a line all the way back. I mean, we definitely had it before the Reformation. So we would trace the lines the same way you would. whether you want to go to, I mean, Saint Alban wasn't a priest anyway, so we would just point to him as a martyr. But
no, but yeah, I just meant the early missionaries that kind of came.
Yeah. So yeah, we would point to that apostolic line and say that we share those roots within the apostles. For instance, I don't know which one is traced back with my current bishop, but my old bishop was traced back through St. Andrew. So as one example of his apostolic succession, his line of succession. So we would actually point to the apostles. We see ourselves as a continuation of that. And the idea of a reform is not to, take away. We're not like the 19th century restorationists, which is where the fundamentalist Baptists kind of come from. This idea that the church didn't exist until our time, for thousands of years or hundreds of years or whatever. Yeah. And then we came on the scene and we're restoring the church. That's what like the Mormons do or things like that. The Reformation is the idea of like the church is there, it just needs to be fixed. I mean, even like the Gregorian reforms and the Counter-Reformation itself was a form of Reformation,
Sure,
so it's that sort of thing.
There's I can't remember who it was who said it off the top of my head, but there, it's been said that the Catholic Church is always reforming herself. She's always in need of reform and is reforming.
Semper Reformanda, which is also a Reformed, a Protestant line. But go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So no. So that's, but so you would agree at least that yes, it began as kind of part of the one of a single. We were one body, early on up through the 16th century.
The question of one body also gets into a thing because we see sort of a both and when it comes to the question of one body when in the scriptures. So in the scriptures, you've got St. Paul talking about why are there all these divisions amongst you. He points out to actual divisions happening within the church, but at the same time he says you are one body. Like, is Christ's body divided? So there's the question of like, well, to one extent the body is indivisible. But then to another extent, you can actually talk about there being divisions within the body. And that gets teased out and a little bit complicated. I think the sort of St. Cyprian approach, which tends to be the way that it's done by Roman Catholics today, I think is very wrongheaded. And it makes sense from a Roman perspective because you're defining the Catholicity of the church through the Bishop of Rome, which...
Through being in union with
but Catholicity is defined by the Roman bishop, which to me then becomes a major issue, especially with this one, but even with like the better ones, like the previous two.
Sure. I would hasten to mention too that as far as Roman, I mean that really, we would say that that's the Roman or Latin rite is the largest, but it's one rite within the church. I mean there are others who are not Roman that are in the Catholic church communion, Melkites and Ruthenians. So
the Byzantines.
In my area in particular, here we have many. In fact, most of my neighbors are Chaldean Catholics. So there's a great number of them, and they do their liturgy in I think in it's Chaldean is it's a language related to Aramaic, I believe. So it goes way back to the beginning. But yeah, just as an aside there.
No, but I will say that there have been papal bulls and things like that have actually used terminology like Roman Catholic. And,
sure.
But
it's
talking
been the
about
largest, certainly since the great.
Well, talking about their whole communion, not just the rite, not just the Roman rite, but talking about Byzantine, etc. Like
sure.
So.
Yep. So, I guess in terms of getting to kind of that whole issue of apostolic succession, kind of what happened there during the 16th century in more detail. I do agree that Henry VIII, I mean he essentially left pretty much everything in place the way it had been under his reign, other than declaring himself the head of the English Church. Not a whole lot was done. I'm curious though if you have any thoughts on things like the martyrdom of St. Thomas More, if just because that did happen under Henry VIII. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on him in particular at all, or feel as though he took the
I'm conflicted. Yeah, I'm conflicted because I mean Henry VIII. We don't. There's a reason he's not a canonized saint. Um, we don't have him as a canonized saint. I mean, we actually have canonized saints such as King Charles the Martyr, who was basically martyred by Presbyterians, and I would put William Laud up there as well, the Archbishop of Canterbury. But yeah, no, I mean, I disagree with Thomas More on a few things, but I think he is a martyr of the faith in many ways. It's a bit complicated, I would say. So I don't dislike Thomas More, but I also disagree with him fundamentally on quite a few issues.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, moving to really, I think that
if I can return that, then what are your thoughts on Latimer, Ridley, and Cranmer, and them? They were all martyred as well.
Yeah. Well, Cranmer, I know a little bit more about. It's an interesting case, isn't it? Because I mean, he's somebody who, and that's what I was getting to actually was really where things really, I think, really changed at least a great deal within the Anglican Church. Was under Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, the first Queen Elizabeth I, not the second.
Well, Cranmer wasn't under her, of course, but
but that's where things started. And so Cranmer, I mean, he writes the Common Book of Prayers and essentially, and and really this is something that I was going to get to, but the Pope Leo the 13th in Apostolic Curae, where he talked about the issue of Anglican holy orders and whether they were valid. And from the Catholic perspective, the issue was that Cranmer that the ordination as it came to be no longer was seen by the Anglican Communion itself as being a sacrificial priesthood, but rather was I guess merely, we would say, an ecclesiological function, an ecclesiological priesthood. So, I mean, I was curious for your thoughts on that. But yeah, in terms of Cranmer, I think it's complicated because at the time of his death, of his execution, he essentially, he said something to the effect that he had sinned or that he had made a great error of some type. He said
Cranmer, you're saying? You said?
Yes, Cranmer. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Cranmer recanted his Protestant beliefs, and then he recanted his recantation and was put to death.
So it's hard to know in the end exactly. I mean, it's hard to get inside his head,
but he recanted his recantation,
sure.
and he actually had his. Actually, this might be apocryphal. No, I don't think it's apocryphal. He had his right hand. He had his hand burned in the flame before to say, "I want to offend the most sinful member first, or I want to punish the most sinful member first," and and that was the hand that he wrote, signed the recantation, the original recantation on.
So I mean, I think he's I think he's a bit of a complicated character in terms of
he's definitely complicated.
What was going on with him psychologically and where even his own perspective lay by the end of things is somewhat hard to tell for 400 years later. I mean, it's
I don't think it's hard to tell since he was willing to die for it. He literally recanted his recantation. But then also Latimer and Ridley, I mean, when they're being sent to the pyre, Latimer shouts out to Ridley, "Play the man, Ridley. We shall set a fire today in England that will, reignite the church," or whatever, something like that.
Yeah,
like they went dying as martyrs, all three of them. So like there's martyrs on both sides. So sure. I personally don't like the whole, "Oh, you guys persecuted a bunch of Catholics in the church." I'm like, okay, you need to see what happened to the other side too. Like,
sure, and I wouldn't make a charge like that anyway. I just was curious for your thoughts on him. He's not St. Thomas More isn't someone that as you already said, Henry VIII wasn't exactly a wonderful guy. I was just curious for your thoughts. I think that on both sides, it's one of those things where that's kind of the thing that a lot of religious skeptics in general use. And frequently it's it's not even the church, whether it's Anglican church officials or Catholic bishops or whoever who were. It's typically secular authorities. It's the crown. It's legal authorities that are participating in and carrying out these sorts of bloody, violent acts. So yeah.
Yes.
Go
you
ahead.
want to get into apostolic Icuri and apostolic succession?
Well, yeah,
and all
I was
that?
curious. So that was what I was kind of moving to next. I was just wondering what, but in terms of where you see, because I know there were, and that's actually funny. You brought up the persecution and so forth. Frequently within the Anglican communion, within the English Church, a lot of times it would be persecution from one Anglican group or Presbyterian group or some other Protestant group to another. Particularly up until the Oxford movement, where
the English Civil War was sort of the ending of any sort of violence. Yeah,
you would have these periodic periods where Anglican bishops, some of them would want to bring back more liturgy because under Queen Elizabeth I, most of the liturgical practices and as I said, sort of the sacrificial aspect of the priesthood was something that they said we're going to do away with, and then there would be potential pretty harsh kind of stamping out of that and then it would come back again a bit later. So I mean, do you in terms of your thoughts on Anglicanism, do you see your priesthood, the priesthood in general, the ordination, holy orders as being a sacrificial nature, like which we
sacerdotal.
See
so
going back to Hebrews, the idea of a sacrificial priesthood and so forth. Yeah.
Only insofar as it's joined to Christ. Yes. The issue with the Protestant Reformation is the propitiatory nature of the Mass. That was the sacrificing part that was the problem. So the idea of either re-sacrificing Christ at the Mass, which I would say I would argue is actually part of the popular theology of the medieval era in the West, at least. But also, apart from that, either that or the idea of a sort of this being the sacrifice for sins in a different mode, the propitiatory sacrifice in a different mode, which I think is also incredibly problematic. So we would reject that understanding of the sacrifice of the Mass. Now we talk about the idea of it being the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. It is the application of the one sacrifice of Christ. So at the Eucharist,
Todah in the Old Testament, the Todah.
Torah?
Todah, yeah, the Thanksgiving meal of Thanksgiving.
So Christ is the Passover lamb, so we are receiving the sacrifice himself. So we also hold to a position of a form of in persona Christi. Not all of us hold to it, but it's an understanding that we are the priest is acting in the person of Christ.
In the person of Christ, yes.
Yeah, in the Eucharist, but it is not a re-sacrificing of Christ. Now, Roman Catholics have walked away from that since the Reformation, and even parts of the Council of Trent talk about that. Actually, I don't remember if they do or don't. But it's certainly since Vatican II, they've very much weakened the language of sacrifice.
Considered like killing Christ over and over again at every Mass. No, it's more, and this was something that actually came up on a different YouTube thread I was on recently, but it's more the idea of in a sense of time travel of the God the Father. We are being represented that sacrifice at Calvary at every Mass, so that we're brought that it is brought to us again, in the same way that the Hebrews, the Israelites,
the Anamnesis,
see it as a representation of that first Passover. Yes,
and I know very few, even of my most reformed Anglican friends, who would actually have a problem with that. In fact, I don't know of any who would have a problem with that. The issue, though, is that the Apostolic Icuri is going much further than that. It actually is very strong in its understanding that, like with our position, with what you and I are talking about right now, someone who holds to Calvin's view or even Luther's view would be perfectly fine, because as long as Christ is present in some sort of real way in the Eucharist, it applies.
Yeah, well,
So it would
Luther,
only
the whole
go ahead.
consubstantiation idea, which was a little different, but yes, the idea
Well,
that
no,
there's
no.
real presence. Calvin, he, at least to my understanding, he had this idea of a spiritual presence, but not. I don't think I don't think anyone that would a Calvinist would consider him to have said that Christ was substantially really present and more a spiritual presence.
So a few things. So the first one is Lutherans would not call it consubstantiation. That would be sort of an outsider's view of it, and that's not a better term might be something like sacramental union. It's the position I hold to, that the bread and wine are there truly, and the body and blood of Christ are there truly, and they are united. So the body and blood is under the forms of bread and wine.
Yeah, that's what
Right.
that's what I was getting at with that term. Yeah.
So that's the Luther position.
Yeah.
And then the Calvin position is a bit more complicated. People, when they say spiritual presence, what they tend to mean is non-physical presence, but is somehow still there, even though not physically, which works for non-physical things, but Christ is physical. So that's not what Calvin would hold to. Calvin would actually hold to the uniting of heaven and earth happening at the Mass. So in the Mass, Calvin has this really weird hang-up, and he gets it from Vermigli, who was who escaped persecution in Italy. He gets it from Vermigli, this idea that Christ does not leave heaven ever, like almost like he can't get off his throne. And he can't be in two places at once in his bodily, his physical body cannot be in two places at once. So because of that, we can't say that Christ's body and blood are physically present in the Eucharist unless we say that in the Eucharist, heaven and earth are united for a moment, and in that you are in the eating and drinking of the body and blood, or of the bread and wine, you are by faith feasting upon Christ. So Christ is actually present physically, but it's through a union between heaven and earth. It's very complicated. I probably haven't done it enough service, but it's very different from this idea of just, oh, he's just here spiritually. And by spiritually, I mean non-physically, but he's kind of floating around as a ghost or something, you know.
Which that almost gets more to at least closer to Zwingli and so forth.
Yeah, that one. And now I won't deny that a lot of modern Presbyterians and things like that, in the 19th century, there was a shift away from any sort of sacramental importance within the Reformed world in the United States. So this is headed by B.B. Warfield and others like that, the Princeton theologians. And they start first by denying the validity of Roman Catholic baptisms, or not. I don't want to call them Roman Catholic baptism, but baptisms done by Roman Catholics. They're like, well, look, they're heretics. How can we accept their baptism? They're like, well, because it's a Trinitarian baptism. That's why you can accept it. So what they ended up doing was they started denying the objectivity of the sacraments, which Calvin is very big on the objectivity of the sacraments, both baptism and the Eucharist. Calvin holds to a form of baptismal regeneration. Obviously, Luther does, but Calvin does too. So do Anglicans. And so that is pushed away. And by the time it gets watered down to the 21st century, it's now this sort of just spiritual presence means we kind of feel him, you know, he's just like he's here.
And there's now essentially a denial of I mean, that there are no sacraments for a lot of those, a lot of the Reform of Protestantism.
They don't even like they don't even like the terms of sacraments.
Yeah. Well, I think that gets at least an idea in terms of where you're coming from, in terms of you know, how Anglican ordination, how you see holy orders within the communion. Do you feel as though, I mean, it was, I guess from a Catholic, one of the questions I would have would be specifically the chain, kind of a physical chain of custody. I mean, again, the idea that the part of the holy orders of ordination, it was, as St. Paul talks about to Timothy in his epistles and so forth, this laying on of hands and kind of an official physical passing on of the office. So I mean, do you see that as having still been able to continue even through Queen Elizabeth I? Because I mean, a lot of the, at least historically, from it's my understanding that most of the bishops were that they were replaced by Protestant bishops within under Elizabeth I. I mean, again, Henry VIII left everything mostly. The structure was there, but then there's a pretty, at least historically, what looks to be a pretty dramatic shift.
So with Queen Elizabeth, first of all, the same thing happened with Queen Mary. Queen Mary, I mean, the three men I mentioned were just three of the martyrs. Those are all three bishops.
Yeah.
Latimer, Ridley, and actually, pretty sure Latimer and Ridley are bishops too. But like, she replaced the Protestant bishops and all that sort of stuff, and replaced them with Roman bishops and all that sort of stuff. So it goes back and forth. But then when it comes to Matthew Parker, who becomes the next archbishop after Queen Mary dies, he becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Roman apologetics, until the 1800s, with Apostolic Eccuria, the Roman apologetics were based upon pure fiction. Much of it was based upon pure fiction, which was this idea that Matthew Parker was, quote, consecrated at a pub, basically, called the Nog's Head, or some Nag's Head.
I've heard it.
And there was a Bible placed upon, this is a prayer book, but there was a Bible placed upon him and said, "You're a bishop now," and that's it. Like, that was completely false. In fact, there are meticulous details about his consecration, very purposefully, meticulous details about his consecration happening at the cathedral and all that sort of stuff. And the only part true of that, I think, is that they did go afterwards and eat at the Nag's Head. So that's the only true part about it. But like, he was consecrated by four bishops who, a combination of bishops who survived from prior to Queen Mary. They fled and then they came back, kind of thing. And even at least one was a Roman bishop who participated in the consecration. So they had four bishops there. If you study Anglicanism post-Reformation, you find a few times where things like that happen. When the United States, with the Revolutionary War happened, Samuel Seabury, who was our first bishop, we didn't have bishops. They all had to be sailed across and then to get ordained and then come back as priests and all that sort of stuff. He decided, I'm going to go because we want the church to survive and we need bishops. I'm going to go to England to get consecrated. And they didn't consecrate him there. Part of it was because of the war. It just happened. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to go to Scotland and ask the people in Scotland if they would consecrate me. So he was, and then eventually the bishops in England then had him consecrated, or had others consecrated. So we ended up having four bishops. And then there were questions even at that time, and this is way before the sort of Anglo-Catholic movement. There were questions of like, well, wait a minute, is he a legitimate bishop because he's a Scottish bishop now? Are his orders valid? And they decide, well, we need to have, we have these other three who are consecrated as bishops, so we'll have them all four consecrate others as bishops, and that'll be okay. We take apostolic succession very seriously, even if we don't use the same sort of terminology as Roman Catholics. It has always been taken very seriously.
So you do agree that physical passing on of office is, that it's not, it can't just be like an amorphous kind of, in the spirit.
Of like, I was called by the Spirit, so I'm ordained now. No. Yeah. So let me read this.
I think that was why, at least in Apostolic Eccuria, why Pope Leo XIII, he didn't go into argumentation particularly on, there was, this break in specific succession here. Instead, again, it goes back to that issue of did the Anglican holy orders after Elizabeth I, did they still see themselves as ordaining priests into a proper sacrificial priesthood, which is again why the Eastern Orthodox churches, of course, are recognized, because again they have that continuing sacrificial aspect of the priesthood that is recognized.
I would argue otherwise with the Eastern Orthodox, but
really?
It depends on
way afield, but really that's interesting. Okay,
it depends on, because I've talked with Eastern Orthodox theologians and they say no, we don't believe in a sort of we don't believe in a propitiatory sacrificial nature of the priesthood. Now, some parts of the Eastern Orthodox would say that, but it goes back and forth. So I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to study it further. But I want to read this. This is the ordinal's preface. So the ordinal is our ordination rite for the diaconate, priesthood, and episcopate. And this is from, this one is in my 1928 Book of Common Prayer, which is basically sort of our version of the, not the way that Roman Catholics look at the TLM is how the 1928 is kind of looked at. It's like, this is the hardcore traditional prayer book, at least in the United States. Somewhat of a comparison there. So this is the preface, but this is the preface that goes all the way back to the first prayer book, or the first ordinal, I should say, in the 1500s. It is evident unto all men, diligently reading holy scriptures and ancient authors, that from the apostles' time there have been these orders of ministers in Christ's church, bishops, priests, and deacons, which offices were evermore had in such reverend estimation that no man might presume to execute any of them, these offices, except he were first called, tried, examined, and known to have such qualities as are requisite for the same, and also by public prayer with imposition of hands were approved and admitted thereunto by lawful authority. And therefore, to the intent that these orders may be continued, as Anglicans, we saw ourselves continuing, not making something new, that these orders may be continued and reverently used and esteemed in this church. No man shall be accounted or taken to be a lawful bishop, priest, or deacon in this church, or suffered to execute any of the said functions, except he be called, tried, examined, and admitted thereunto, according to the form hereafter following, or hath had episcopal consecration or ordination. That's the first paragraph of it. It was a bit long, sorry, but the point being that they saw them. We see ourselves as a continuation of what we've received before us. The issue would be the idea of the propitiatory sacrificial nature of the priesthood. Now, with that, I want to say this: suppose Roman Catholics are right that it is proper to have a propitiatory sacrificial nature of the priesthood in the understanding of the priesthood. Okay. I would say, even if that were the case, and even if we do wholeheartedly rejected that, the problem is Roman Catholics are in a bind right now, because here's the problem. I have a family member, my closest family member, who is Roman Catholic. He grew up like me, Baptist, and he was baptized as a Baptist. Now, when he became Roman Catholic, this is not some liberal branch or anything like that, this is just standard Roman Catholic, his baptism was accepted. And I know that for a fact because I was part of the examination of that. I had a sign saying I was a witness to his baptism and all that sort of stuff. So I'm saying that because of this. As you know, independent fundamental Baptists do not believe in baptismal regeneration. True. If you grew up independent fundamental Baptist, you probably have been baptized 3 or 4 times because you're constantly getting rebaptized, like, oh, because now I prayed the sinner's prayer, now I really mean it, that sort of thing. That happened to me 3 times. I think 2 or 3 times, I don't remember. But they do not have an understanding of the nature of baptism that is anything at all like a Roman Catholic understanding of baptism. Yet their baptisms are still accepted because it has the proper form, proper matter, all that sort of stuff. Doesn't even have, quote, the proper intent, which would be the argument for against our holy orders. But if you don't need the proper intent in a baptism, which you are being joined to Christ, you are literally being joined to Christ in baptism. You're being made a part of the church. When, as fundamentalist Baptists, we explicitly reject that, or not currently, because neither of us is, but we explicitly rejected that. We would literally, I grew up with this. We would say, this doesn't make you a member of the church,
absolutely,
and all that sort of stuff. This doesn't save you. All this does is demonstrate that you are a Christian. It's your public profession of faith was the thing, and that is not at all. That is not at all the understanding, the Catholic that you and I would share understanding of baptism. So then the question is, if that's the case, then why is it one standard for baptism but a different standard for holy orders?
Sure. Now, I get your question. I would have to look more into that issue specifically as to why, but I do know that I can say this off the top of my head without having researched it. Baptism is in of itself a different mode of sacrament from holy orders and from the Eucharist or from confession. It is one that by nature the church has recognized can be given, for instance, can be confected by someone who's not a priest. You know, people always get these questions like, you know, what if, you know, oh, my children have left the faith and now they've just had their first child, and, you know, can I, is it when they're not looking, can I, can I baptize the baby? If necessary, yes. I mean, someone who's not, you know, a member of the, who's not a priest can carry out baptism. So there are reasons that go into deeper theology that I would need to look into to really fully answer that. But I know that theologically it has been said for, you know, it's been said all along that it taught that it has a different quality than that.
But it's not the question of the minister, though. So it's not the question of the minister.
Marriage, that's even a marriage also is, again, that's a sacrament that's not confected or not carried out by the priest. Even he's there to officiate, but it's a sacrament that's entered into by the husband and wife. So yeah. But
the point I'm bringing up is that baptism, there is no overlap on what baptism means for a Roman Catholic or for just a Catholic in general versus what a Baptist would say a baptism is when it comes to what it is actually doing. So the arguments from the arguments from Rome against my legitimacy as a priest is that there was not the proper intention in my ordination, but there's not the proper intention in the baptism that I received. And I would say that
I was baptized in a Baptist church. I only had the one. For some reason, I never felt like I needed to get in more than once. But yeah, I mean, it was accepted as long, you know, I had to get a certificate, a letter, or whatever to prove that I was baptized. But yeah, I mean, again, I'd have to look more into that in detail. But it has to do with the generosity of God, I think is partly the theology there, that anyone who wishes to be baptized, or someone who baptizes them, even if they don't have, even if the person that was having it done at the time does not understand this to be something that confers grace, that confers the remission of sins, that it still nevertheless is effective. That's
So that's part of the and I've done like 3 or 4 debates with Roman Catholic friends of mine on holy orders. If you want to see those and all that sort of stuff, I think 1 or 2 of them is on my channel. But yeah, did you want to continue on that line, or did you want to go on other parts?
Well, sure. Yeah. As I said, I mean, I think there's, you know, not much else that I can add to that at this point. Anyway, I'd have to look into that in more detail. But again, it's something that it's a sacrament that differs from holy orders in the, you know, with important respects, and that's what it would be said, I'm sure, as to why it could be effective even when you don't understand it to be conferring the grace that it does. Yeah. Yeah, if we have some time, I wanted to kind of, I guess, touch a little base, because I think, you know, I mean, again, theologically, you know, obviously we're in a lot of places of agreement, in many places. I think that the sort of bugaboo of papal infallibility of some of the popes of the past is one of the major, certainly sticking points. I just kind of wanted to revisit a couple of those if we have time anyway.
Yeah, sure.
First, we already brought him up earlier, but I mean, I think that Pope Vigilius is somebody that deserves, at least in my mind, deserves maybe a little bit more of an apology than he has gotten oftentimes. I think that historically, at least from my perspective as a Catholic, he might be a case in point of be careful what you wish for. You know, you might get it. He does seem to have been someone who really badly wanted to be Pope, and to the extent that whatever sort of agreement may have been made beforehand to win the support of the Empress Theodora, who was a monophysite. Once he was brought into the papacy, I mean, he immediately turned around and said, you know, he betrayed her. Essentially, he said, "I can't teach that. That's heresy. As Pope, I can't make those teachings. He, to the extent that he left the deposition of the heretic and Themis in place. He didn't commendate or get or remove those depositions. The 3 chapters issue was really kind of the big thing at his during his papacy. And there, I think he again, he may not be getting the credit he deserves. Although I would also say, as an aside, it must have been interesting to be a fly on the wall in the private chambers of the Emperor Justinian and his wife, considering the two of them obviously had very different ideas about the nature of Christ. But
definitely,
yeah. So he was called, and as you mentioned earlier, was imprisoned for 8 years by Justinian in Constantinople. Essentially, was imprisoned there. But the issue with him never was that he was formally teaching monophysitism, or even that he agreed with it. It was rather that he was actually trying to uphold the teachings of the Council of Chalcedon, because the Western churches, the Western side of the Catholic Church, felt that the council had firmly repudiated, had already repudiated monophysitism, and that if he were to sign various forms of letters that Justinian essentially tried to push upon him over these 8 years, that they would end up looking as though the Pope was discrediting or somehow needed to say more about this than what the Council of Chalcedon had already said. And so he refused to sign these sorts of things for 8 years, until they finally brought him one where it essentially made a carve out that the canons of the Chalcedonian Council would still be effective, were upheld, but that he was formally discrediting denouncing monophysitism. And indeed, after he signed that, and then was released and actually died en route back to Rome, really. I mean, he never really made it back. The Western churches, I mean, it caused a great deal of uproar. It was met with a great deal of bitterness and anger for him having even signed that. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting case, because it seems as though he finagled his way into the papacy, but then ended up having actually to more or less trying to keep unity in the church, really had to bear something of a bit of a martyr's cross. I mean,
So there might be a sort of miscommunication when it comes to sort of things like this. So my position is not, well, I would believe in papal infallibility except for Pope Vigilius and Pope Honorius and maybe Pope Francis or whatever. My position is, I see no evidence for it. No. So when people say, well, there has to be some evidence for it, like, well, I essentially see no evidence for it in the Bible or in the patristic consensus. I see the highest form of authority being Scripture itself, and then under that being what we now call the ecumenical councils. Although that's a bit like they're sort of chosen after the fact in many instances. So with and I point to Pope Vigilius and to Pope Honorius and others like that. Also, the Third Ecumenical Council with another pope, but an Alexandrian pope. The Alexandrian pope, was it Cyril? Yeah, Cyril of Alexandria, and his issues with Nestorius of Constantinople. Nestorius sort of asks the Pope, "Hey, please, can you hear my case?" And he says, "No, you're a heretic." And he goes, "You know what? I'm going to ask for an ecumenical council," and that indicates in everyone's mind the ecumenical council is even higher than the papacy, which is the issue. So
he made an appeal, and that's understandable. He made an appeal. Yeah. The Pope has to eventually ratify a council by one way or another.
Yeah, so effective. I would reject the idea that the Pope has to ratify a council, because the Second Ecumenical Council was not ratified by any Bishop of Rome for a long time.
Yeah,
But it was still the councils themselves, the Third Ecumenical Council, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, identified the Second Ecumenical Council as an ecumenical council, even though the Bishop of Rome himself didn't.
Yeah, well, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, anyone would have to agree that you know the idea of charisma of the seed of the faith or whatever being in Scripture, but that things, you know, doctrines develop or grow deeper in understanding over time. That, you know, some of these things were not certainly as obvious or as spelled out as they have come to be. That's for sure. So and I totally agree. I mean, I understand it, your position in terms of what you see in Scripture and so forth. I just wanted to kind of go over a couple of these in if we had time anyway, to mention from the Catholic side at least the argument to the effect that that there has not been a pope yet that has definitively taught ex cathedra, taught a heresy, that sort of thing.
Oh, I disagree.
That there is a Catholic argument that you know, a couple of times that they've been close. We've had what appear to be close calls, but that hasn't happened because obviously, you know, yeah. I mean, if the church were to say that any particular example that this did happen in history, well, you know, that is pretty devastating to your to a foundational doctrine. So yeah, that's critical.
Oh no, I would say, for instance, the Immaculate Conception is heresy, and that's formally taught.
Yeah,
so,
well, sure. I would disagree there, but
yeah. As just one example, I would say papal infallibility is a heresy.
But so yeah, I mean, I'm talking in terms of from what the church actually formally teaches, where the church would say, "Oh, okay, this was definitively."
Yeah, Rome formally teaches papal infallibility.
And now we're having to.
Oh, you're saying that they? So yeah, I mean, it's easy to sort of sidestep those things when you look back at history and sort of that's not you sidestepping. My point being that. Rome does want to be as consistent as possible with what's been received before. My point being that, like, if you look at sort of what's been done and declared, you don't see these very strong statements that Rome makes about the papacy in Vatican I. Like, in fact, I would argue that what seems to be being done in the first millennium is a rejection of Vatican I, either implicitly or well, not explicitly because they don't know of Vatican I, obviously. But again, the idea that the Ecumenical Council supersedes the authority of any pope or anything like that, where the Pope himself, the Bishop of Rome, is seen as a first among equals and not having sort of universal jurisdiction and can't be questioned when it comes to matters of dogma.
Yeah, so the idea, the doctrine of universal jurisdiction and so forth, which are the biggest, I would predict your biggest issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other one I just wanted to visit was Honorius, because I think he's also an interesting case, because he often is brought up as kind of the prime example where definitely here we have, you know, heresy. And again, there it is much more complicated than that. So he comes along as you know after Vigilius, a bit after him. This is the monothelitism era.
Yeah, that's monothelitism. Yeah,
becomes a big issue. And what actually occurs here is interestingly, there's a church historian named John Bury who's put forth pretty good arguments to the effect that Honorius may have been asleep at the wheel and probably didn't understand grammatically from an issue of grammar just what exactly the issue even was. Because it was an issue that had arisen as a big problem, whether Christ had one energy or one will or two wills, and it was in the Eastern churches. And so the bishop, now patriarch, but the bishop Sergius of Constantinople writes him a letter, and he's come up essentially with the bright idea that would be monothelitism, that because he doesn't want Christ to be seen as to be having had the possibility to have a human will that could be in conflict with the divine will. So he writes Honorius a pretty sneakily worded letter, essentially saying, could you please just ask people to not, to the effect of, could you just ask people to not fight about this? We should not talk about it anymore, but also could you confirm that Christ doesn't have a human will that would conflict with his divine will? It's better to say he has one will that they wouldn't conflict. And so Honorius essentially writes back saying Christ's human will was as the will of Adam before the fall, that he did not have a human will that could be in conflict with the divine will, is essentially how he writes this letter. And so how it's worded, the Monothelites kind of run with it for a little while, like, oh, it looks like the Pope's, endorsing this idea that Christ only has one divine will and no human will, but that's never what he was teaching or writing, and indeed it wasn't really the issue he was going with. What he ended up doing, though, was he did basically say, I want to forbid fighting over this. I want to just, no one fight about this. We're not going to argue about it. And so the council later, decades after his death, the Ecumenical Council that Pope Saint Agatho was Pope during his papacy, he asks them not to charge Honorius in the council with heresy. He says he never taught this, and it doesn't even appear that he necessarily believed it. He just, he failed to defend the faith. He, stopped and was negligent. The council went ahead and convicted him of it anyway. And then his successor, who was, Pope St. Leo II, he ends up approving the council, but in his approving letter, his letter approving the council, he changes that. Indeed, he changes that condemnation. He removes it. He says Honorius was guilty of negligence in defending the faith, and so he goes down in history for that, which I think is interesting. And I wonder what your thoughts are on this, just as an aside. Really, I mean, that's kind of historically what it looks like happened here. But in a way, the whole idea of going along to get along, right? Like, I don't want to cause a schism. I don't want to cause a fight. Honorius almost looks like something that you often see in other, not Anglicanism necessarily, but other Protestant groups oftentimes, where you have the theological minimalism sort of idea, like the whole, we're going to, nobody fight about these deeper issues. We'll just keep the theology nice and nice.
It's a misunderstanding. It's
so
a misunderstanding of. It's a misunderstanding of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity explicitly says, he gives the story of, or the idea of the Mere Christianity being the hallway and the rooms being different denominations. He goes, don't confuse the hallway with the denominations, though, with the rooms. The point of the hallway is to get you to one of the rooms. Go into one of the rooms and start talking with people and stuff like that, but pick a room. The hallway is not a room. And Mere Christianity has been misrepresented as the hallway is itself a room, and he vehemently opposes that. So the whole non-denominational, I just love Jesus is not a C.S. Lewis thing. And you weren't saying that, but I just wanted to clarify that for people watching.
No, yeah. But I think it's interesting that here we have a case where essentially what Honorius was rightly criticized for and vilified for in the ensuing centuries was essentially something similar to that, in a way of kind of, we're gonna not deal, we don't want to argue about this because we don't want to split, so everybody just shut up and we'll just agree that we're not going to talk about this issue. I mean, I don't know if you ever attended any during your Protestant pre-Anglican days, if you ever attended any sort of the big thing in America now, the sort of non-denominational mega church scene. I
was part of one.
Okay. Yeah. I attended one for a few years too. And that is sort of the phenomenon you see there, where you have an amazing rock show and a good sermon and all that, but where the theology is kept very much at a, just Jesus, and then let's agree not to argue about anything else. It's kind of
Yeah, I found it rather frustrating because it was in many ways it was a very anti-intellectual. Now, obviously, there's a problem in being sort of quote overly intellectual, where it's just sort of where Christianity becomes just a head game for you. But it was very problematic where I would ask. I asked a very basic question to the pastor at this megachurch that I was at about Molinism, which you should at least know what Molinism is. If you're a pastor, like that should at least be something on your radar. You might not be able
Sure.
to espouse it perfectly, but like you should at least know what that word exists. And the guy didn't know about it at all.
Yeah.
And in fact, I asked him, like, it was a two-part question of like, is this church, because I was about to go into the church, into that big the mega church, and my question was, do you hold to Calvinism, Arminianism, or are you something like a Molinist, or what? And he refused to answer the question, and he didn't even know what Molinism was. So like, there tends to be a sort of anti-intellectual mindset within the big church non-denom types. But yeah, we both agree on the problems with that.
Yeah.
Did you have any others? Because I was going to get into questions now, unless you had any others that you
yeah, well, I guess, yeah, just in wrapping up,
Yeah.
we should move it along. If anyone does have any questions, I don't know, that'd be
Uh.
good. But I was curious, the main thing I wanted to ask about kind of in closing was just, you do, I understand, I've watched some of your debates and so forth from before, and you do hold to a doctrine, it would seem to me, of kind of as some form of a primacy, of a Petrine primacy, some form of that, right? The authority of Peter, having authority in the early church as kind of the leader of the apostles and so forth. That's correct, right?
I'll elaborate on it. So I'm not necessarily convinced that the Petrine office is a divine thing. I first and immediately see the pragmatism of having a single bishop who sort of is sort of like the first among equals,
Exactly.
as like the Supreme Court Chief Justice would be. But I would say that the papacy should not model itself after this, but the idea it should be is like similar to how the Chief Justice is amongst the Supreme Court, where the others are bishops, and he just sort of is the figurehead in front of it. So he doesn't have like extra voting power. If the other 8 justices vote one way, he doesn't get to say too bad and stamps the other way, kind of thing. Which is essentially what the papacy is today. Like if all of the other bishops today said one thing and the Bishop of Rome said ex cathedra, something else, all the other bishops have to be considered wrong. That is canonically what has to happen.
Yeah, and I understand your trepidation there. I guess just briefly, as a Catholic, I would hasten to say that we have to put our faith in this, that the idea of papal infallibility, or of universal jurisdiction, this idea is something that says less about the Pope and his power than it does about the Holy Spirit, and the belief that the Holy Spirit will guide the church and prevent it from falling into error. But I completely understand, that the trepidation, the idea that this one man would have all this power, it would look like, to steer the church. I would say there that I think that we have to put our faith in the Holy Spirit, that he would prevent that he will prevent the Pope from ending up taking the church completely off the rails. And I think that's the idea, because you're right. There is, as you just said, there is something important about being able to have at some point a leading voice that can say, well, we've argued about X issue, and we've thought this has been going on, and so now we've got to make a decision, and this needs to be it, and have the church remain in unison. So, I think you mentioned earlier at one point that the idea of the Pope has caused a great deal of division and disunity. But I think if you look at the past 500 years anyway, the amount of theological and moral disunity and everything else about, what Christianity is, what we're to believe, how we're to live, is contraception okay or not, is, abortion okay? There's one issue or after another where, without that leading voice, at least it seems to me that there's a great deal more disunity in the end. And
that's necessarily
and
the
an
case.
inability to sort of solve it. That's the other thing. It's just, if I don't like it, then I'll just go to a different church. right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's,
that's necessarily the case if you've got one person who's the final authority. Like,
yeah,
if you disagree with that person who's the final authority, that, like, there's always only going to be one opinion if you've got that. But the other issue is that that's not a fault of Protestantism. I would say. So you didn't do this, but there's often the sort of 30,000 denominations, which is a supremely overblown number that people throw out
it's
there.
overblown.
It-
It's overblown.
yeah, but like by hundreds of, like by a lot of factors. Even by that own study, the way they define Protestant is only 9,000, um, which is already off by 20,000. But then when you look at how they define denomination, literally you could have two groups that believe the same exact thing, that are literally in communion with each other. If they are in different countries, they count as different denominations.
Yeah.
So like it's a crazy stupid thing.
It's an overblown number. I would say, though, from my perspective, I think that the Holy Spirit cannot be the author of confusion. And so, to my mind, if the number is more than 2, I think there's a real problem.
Yeah, but that comes to the question, and I don't deny it, that goes back to the question that the church has to be one. We have to be united.
Yeah.
So no one that I know of is saying, no serious theologian that I know of is saying from either side that, oh, well, it's okay to have two denominations that have fundamental disagreements on things, on essential points of faith. That's perfectly, like, no one says that.
Yeah. Or, well, and I should correct myself. I meant if the number's 2 or more. But yeah, you get what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, I have disagreements with Rome, which is why I'm not Roman Catholic. But on top of that, I think that I'm genuinely in the belief that I am part of the church, that I am part of the Church Catholic. So I have no reason to leave. Like, I have a lot of agreements with Lutherans, for instance, and I love Lutherans, but I am Anglican. So like the disagreements I have with Lutherans are not essential to salvation. And even within Rome, the Roman Catholic Church has disagreements on theology. So for instance, the debate between the Thomists and the Molinists, well, specifically the Dominicans and the Molinists, the Pope said, actually, they're mutually exclusive beliefs. Molinism is not allowable within the sort of Dominican framework. And what does the Pope say? He's like, oh, it doesn't matter. You can have one or the other. Evolution. Evolution is okay. Evolution is okay to believe in. And six-day creationism. Yeah.
Yeah, creationism, so, evolution. Sure.
We can throw out the God is not the author of confusion thing, and I'm not trying to be whatever, but like, we can say that, but then everyone has an allowance of disagreement that of mutually exclusive positions. So I don't think that's
nobody's.
The question is what is essential. Yeah,
we're not arguing. Yeah, we're certainly not arguing for like a monolithic oneness where like you can't not like hot cocoa because I like hot cocoa. That's silly. I guess my last question for your thoughts before opening to any questions, other Q&A other people have, is just I would be curious then in terms of where you see Anglicanism today, specifically with respect to that unity issue. I think, I'm curious as to, because within the Anglican communion, you have obviously some bishops that would theologically be at great odds with your beliefs in terms of the basic theology, where that they would deny the real presence, deny sacramentology, a sacramental theology.
Oh, it's even worse than that. I wish that was all it was. Like,
and then you have the moral theology issues too, where you have the blessing of same-sex marriages and saying abortion is morally acceptable, and then another bishop 20 miles away that says no, that's completely unacceptable. So I'm curious, how do you think that will work itself out? Where do you see that going?
It's working itself out right now. We're in the midst of that. I would say this is the worst point of post-Reformation Anglicanism for Anglicans today. It's tough. Yeah. But I would say it's not as bad as the late medieval Roman situation. And with the late medieval Roman situation, I mean, look at Pope Alexander, alive, I think during the time of Luther. The orgies literally in
no one's denying the extreme corruption. There was a lot of bad stuff.
And like, for me, I like the idea of, well, if you were to ask him formally, he would have formally said orgies were bad. Like, that's a small comfort to me. You know?
That's cold comfort. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's this. The issue is that as Anglicans, I recognize that there's no single man on earth. There's no single man apart from Christ who is infallible. Even when the people, the men who wrote the scriptures, they are only infallible insofar as they were used by the Holy Spirit. And I know Roman Catholics say, well, that's how the papacy is used and all that sort of stuff. But my point being that, like, I'm thankful to God that I can admit that we have issues and heresies within our ranks. I have to be able to say that. Within the Roman tradition today, I mean, it's tough because you've got literally the Bishop of Rome, and I know some people argue against this. I don't know your position, but literally worshiping an idol.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Literally worshiping an idol, like the Pachamama and all that, like as one example. You remember, you know what I'm talking about with the Pachamama situation?
No, not. I don't.
Oh,
we're talking about Pope Francis, though. But yeah, no.
yeah, the Pachamama idol thing. Okay, so I have a friend of mine who's very defensive about that. It's not an idol and all that sort of stuff.
I'll have to look into that and see. I mean,
invite you to look into
mostly
that.
for Pope Francis, I know that. I mean, he is fond of giving the
Controversy.
almost chopper talk sessions the way Trump would when he was in office, where he will off the cuff say some pretty irritating things that irritate a lot of conservative Catholics. Yeah, I mean, he has this issue.
This goes beyond that. Like literally, the Amazonian Synod in 2019 was had in Rome, and they brought pagan goddess statues and literally had prayer services centered on them. There's video, and it became a huge controversy in 2018 or 2019. But like, it was on EWTN and everything like that. So there's that sort of stuff. Like, for me, it's like, okay, yeah, we are at least honest about the liberalism and heresies. And I mean, Pope Francis.
It hasn't been taught ex cathedra. I'll say that so far.
I can say the same thing too. I can say the same thing too. You know, it hasn't been taught ex cathedra for gay marriage. I know.
Do you think? Is there like a separation within Anglicans that you think will need to occur, or how do you see
that's been happening? That's been happening. There have been fractures within Anglicanism. It's called the Anglican realignment. So and the problem, the essential problem is that we lack disciplining our clergymen. All right. That's been since especially since like the 1950s, moving onward. In fact, the parish I'm a part of right now that I serve left the Episcopal Church in the 1960s because Bishop Pike was basically sort of like an early Father James Martin, basically, kind of thing, just a very liberal, and that sort of stuff.
The miracles didn't happen in the body and all that.
Well, yeah, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So he's pretty liberal. And so my parish, my small parish, sort of left. They found a bishop to be under and all that sort of stuff, and like that stuff has been happening. So it became really big in 2003 with the consecration of a priest who it was a non-celibate gay man, and so that became sort of the final straw with the liberalism.
I recall
there was a major shifting and happening and all that sort of stuff. We had alternative bishops put over us and all that sort of stuff, and so that's all been like, that's still settling right now. We're still working through all of that.
Ultimately, I mean, would you say that it requires kind of a more or less a separation, because there doesn't appear to me anyway to be a way to call to carpet a bishop that's kind of goes off the reservation.
So what happened was there was a gathering of what are known as the primates, which are they're slightly above an archbishop. So it's the chief archbishop of a province.
Okay.
There was a gathering of our primates, and the primates voted to basically censure the Episcopal Church for their allowance of gay marriage and all that sort of stuff. So they did that in 2016, I think, or something like that, in 2017, around that time frame, and that was supposed to expire like last year or this year or something, like last year, I think, or something. But COVID happened, so they didn't meet for the primates meeting, and they still haven't met for this primates meeting yet. So hopefully next year it's going to be revisited. It's supposed to be revisited, that censuring.
Okay.
And so they're like, these things are all happening within the Anglican Communion, but the chief issue that's happening, and I'm hoping my generation deals with it, is that we actually deal with disciplining clergymen, because we have standards, we have theological standards, we have confessional standards, we have canon law, we have all these sorts of things. It's just, it's not being enforced. Yeah. So that's been the issue.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, thanks. It's been great.
Yeah, sure.
Any questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
If anyone's
First one.
still on at this point, it's been an hour and a
Oh
half.
yeah, we've been having at least about 15 or 16 throughout the entire thing. It's been a pretty popular one. All right, Alan Rule, who's Roman Catholic, as you can tell by the profile picture. Who's in the chat? That's his question. He's a good friend of mine. I've been on his channel quite a few times. Here's another one from the other side. The Theology Pit. From what I hear, Anglicans are just Roman Catholic LARPers. Is that true? He's a Presbyterian. No, we are Presbyterian LARPers. That's what we are. He's a Presbyterian pastor. So I like him despite him.
It's the old you're just pretending. Why don't you just get it over with? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Why so late? Haha. Hey Joseph. But yeah. Stephen Anderson. Was that someone you guys looked up to when you were fundamentalists? He wasn't a thing back before. Yeah.
I haven't heard of him.
Okay. My type of fundamentalism was.
I remember James Dobson.
Well, he's not fundamental. He's Southern Baptist, so yeah. We would have we considered him too liberal. Yeah, we considered him too liberal. Let's see. Eastern Orthodox deny babies are born guilty sinners. It's a bit more complicated than that. So I wouldn't say they necessarily reject original sin. The issue is that, especially when you get Vladimir Lossky in the 20th century, he sort of becomes anti-West with his theology, and that has a popular push within Eastern Orthodoxy to where they sort of like, oh, if the West believes it, we reject it, that sort of thing. So
yeah, which it's minor. Yeah, I think they don't see it as passing through the sexual union the same way that Augustine formulated it.
Yeah. I wouldn't agree with Augustine either, but yeah. Okay, yeah. So I've actually had Leo Palamite. I've actually had Craig Truglia on and talked about Eastern Orthodox theology. So if you want to, you can go ahead and watch that video. It's a pretty recent one.
I take it he's Orthodox.
Leo Palamite, definitely, I would say, and I'm guessing he's talking about. He says our doctrine of original sin, so I'm guessing the Eastern Orthodox. Yeah. Let's see what else. Don't Lutherans claim to have Presbyterial apostolic succession? I don't know. I know some have said something like that, but there are some Lutherans who do have Episcopal orders within Europe specifically. Let's see. Some of these are pretty long, and I'm not sure if they have actual questions. Let's see. What is the symbolism that Muslim represents that grape juice cannot? Why is freezing grape juice on it? Okay, I don't know what that means.
I'm sorry. Yeah, could you put that back up just to see if I can make sense of that?
I was just going to skip it because I'm not sure.
Freezing grape juice, burn, heating, what? I think this. I know it sounds to me like this is someone who's asking why couldn't they have grape juice for communion, and I think this would be something that you and I probably agree about, correct? That because it must be red grape wine, because we cannot use Cheez-Its for the communion bread, and we cannot use orange juice for the communion.
I wouldn't say that it necessarily has to be red wine. I think that there's been a bit of difference on that, but I would prefer red wine, and we use red wine. But I don't know if there's a consensus about it. It can't be another type of wine or something. But the reason not grape juice is that grape juice is actually like the fermentation process is literally stopped for it. So it's not a natural thing. I would not go so far to say that it's invalid. I would have major issues with it. And so for me, the question is not necessarily if it's valid or invalid. It's sort of like, it's the same issue as like Cheez-Its. Like, maybe it's technically valid because it's still bread-ish, but like, why are you going to do that? It's not the question of validity as much as why are you changing it? Like, we shouldn't change it unless we have a reason, a theological reason to, not because we're trying to be cool.
For Catholics, we would say it's invalid, but we both agree it's not good.
Yeah.
Not good.
I don't know if Rome has made an official statement on Cheez-Its, but
yeah.
Let's see. Don't forget the bishops are like from the curse money. All right. Always appealing to Vatican. Okay, let's see this one. Always appealing to Vatican II, yet that council contradicts much of what the Roman Church said prior to 1965. Council of Florence and Lumen Gentium do not teach the same doctrines.
Okay, I take it this is a set of Vacantist? Is that someone who's for the
nothing.
Old Catholics or people who deny Vatican II and so forth?
Well, I mean, he might not even be Roman. He might be Eastern Orthodox. He might be anything. I don't know. Veritas ex nihilo, truth from nothing. If you want to address that, I mean, I agree with him, but
well, I would say I obviously don't agree. I mean, I think that we do have a valid pope, and that the Vatican II was a valid council. I mean, it's hard to address a sort of blanket statement like that without knowing anything specific. I would say that I definitely hold that that properly understood, nothing in Vatican II would contradict any of the explicit expressed teaching of the Council of Florence or Lumen Gentium or any other prior Catholic ecumenical council. Yeah, I'd have to know more specifically what he or she is getting at.
All right. Since Anglo-Catholic orders are not considered, well, just slight correction, we wouldn't call them Anglo-Catholic orders. They would just be Catholic orders within Anglicanism, but holy orders within Anglicanism. There's no such thing as Anglican orders from our theology. But anyway, since holy orders are not considered valid by Rome within Anglicanism, does Rome consider us receiving Eucharist as spiritual communion if we hold Catholic faith? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I want to be as ecumenical as possible, but yeah, I mean, I think that at least according to, I would have to say according to the current Catholic understanding of the Anglican communion, that at this time they would not see the real presence as having been confected in communion.
All right, and then Jess also put this. He's Latvia. He's from, or he used to be in, or lives in Latvia. Okay. Hi, Jess. All right. This one is one that we both would have a similar answer to. Is Christ truly human? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Does he have a true human body that occupies?
It's like I'm wondering, is this like a trick question? Yeah.
Well, it's leading. Yeah. So does that occupies one space? If so, wouldn't Christology rule out transubstantiation? Why would Scripture use the word bread if no bread? I'm not sure about the last part.
Yeah, I don't.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
By the last part, what do they mean by bread if no bread? What's
okay? So here's the issue. The first one, I would agree with you on this part. There's a problem. This tends to be a more reformed argument. You see it with Vermigli and Calvin and Zwingli and even some of the Anglican reformers. That transubstantiation cannot be true because Christ cannot be in two places at once, because a human body cannot be in two places at once. And since he is seated at the right hand of the Father, he therefore cannot, during the Mass, be bodily present in the Eucharist. So that's Calvin's hang up, and so the others, their hang ups, they try to work it out different ways. My issue is this. Christ can work miracles upon his body. Like literally John 6, the first section has a chapter, or is the feeding of the 5,000. And what is happening there? Christ is multiplying bread and fish. Now, did they stop becoming, were they no longer bread and fish because he was multiplying them? No. So Jesus Christ can do the same thing, the same miracle upon his own body, where he can feed us his flesh and blood through a miracle like multiplying his body and blood. I mean, like that's I've never understood that argument, why it has any sort of power.
Yeah,
But
I'd agree with that.
But the second part, why would Scripture use the word bread if there is no bread? That goes to the question of transubstantiation, which is the problem I have with transubstantiation, which is the idea that the bread and wine are no longer there. It is only body and blood in any sort of substantial way, but the accidents of the bread and wine are there. So it looks like wine, it tastes like wine, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I get what he's saying now. Okay. If I could, I'd like to address this too a little bit. I agree with what you said, certainly about Christ being able to work miracles. I would also add to that he has one human body, but it is a glorified human body. It has properties that are obviously, that Scripture tells us are clearly far beyond our normal human state. He is no longer subject to time, in the sense of being able to get sick, age, die, be injured. He can pass through walls, appear and disappear at will. This always struck me as a bit odd too, from the Reformed perspective, because we would say the sinner's prayer, right, and ask Jesus to live in our hearts. So he is clearly believed by all people who raise this objection to literally be dwelling in all of their hearts around the world all at once. So he is able to be in more than one place at one time. He can give to us his glorified body from beyond time, from beyond eternity, from heaven, anywhere and any time he chooses. As far as that last part about transubstantiation, I'm glad this was brought up. I think it's important to understand that transubstantiation is it was St. Thomas Aquinas's attempt at philosophizing what happens with the real presence, what happens with consecration of the elements at Mass, by appealing to Aristotelian metaphysics. If we don't like Aristotelian metaphysics, if we don't like the word transubstantiation, well, that's fine. We don't have to like that or believe transubstantiation. We are called to believe in what that says is happening, which is that the presence, the real presence of Christ, is now there, and that the acts, which as Aquinas put it, the accidents remain. So on every level, microscopically, the church would always have said, if you could examine it, whatever, you're going to see wine, you're going to see bread. At a metaphysical level, what it truly is in its essence is no longer bread and wine. It is the body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ. So, physically, the accidents, the wood to the chair still is there. The bread and the wine, the physical accidents of it are still there. So
yeah. So I have quite a few things to say to that, but I want to let's get moving on. Let's see.
Sure.
Jess,
it's not something that we're going to understand. I think that's partly what Jesus was saying in John 6, right at the end, was that flesh and blood, the flesh cannot reveal this to you. It's something that you're not going to.
That's Matthew 16, but yeah.
It's at the end of John chapter 6 when Peter says he says, "Are you going to leave too?" And he says, you
have the words of life. Yeah,
you have the words of life. Yeah, he says, yeah. The flesh availeth nothing. That's what he says there. The flesh avails.
That is the spirit, that gives life. The flesh is of no avail. All right, I'm Latvia. The Lutherans and Anglicans celebrate Mass together, trilingual in English, Latvian. I love that. I think that's beautiful. As long as they are orthodox in their beliefs.
That's interesting. Is he saying in Latvia that they do together? I was going to say, because do they do that in the U.S., Lutherans and Anglicans, or no?
Yeah, we have intercommunion with a lot of Lutheran groups and all that. Father James is right about Byzantine emperors and German emperors controlling the papacy, calling councils, removing popes, etc. So kings, they got involved. Let's see.
The crown kings and powers.
The papacy was sold quite a few times.
They jerked around the papacy from time to time. That happens.
Nathan Reed, Thomas Cranmer, Doctrine of the True and Catholic Doctrine of Sacrament. of the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's cheap on Amazon, even though I think Father James is more. Yeah, I'm closer to the Lutheran position on that. I would disagree with Cranmer on the Eucharist. This is a great discussion. Awesome. Yes. Let's see.
Thanks.
If you have questions, all right. Okay, this is one argument that I've made before. If Anglicans don't have holy orders, and neither do modern Roman Catholics, the Novus Ordo rites of ordination contain the same errors Leo XIII condemned in the 1552 Ordinal. So they don't. The Ordinal in the Novus Ordo is missing that phrase for the office of priest when hands are laid upon the person, the man being ordained. So the argument is that, well, if the argument of apostolic curiae is supposed to be equally applied, it should apply to the Roman position as well. There are arguments against that as well, but that's
I was going to say, you've got me flat-footed there. I have to confess, I have not read the Novus Ordo rites fully in detail recently, so I'd have to read it. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Let's see what else. Here we go. Nathan, would you have the exact same beliefs and practices as AD 600 Roman missionaries? Their views on evolution, Noah's flood, young earth, Pauline, Mosaic authorship? If not, why not? I think there's a lot of assumptions being made on his theology, but go ahead.
Yeah, I guess super briefly, I'll address it. I am confident as a Catholic that in terms of the substantive beliefs of the faith, in sacramental theology, in the authority of the bishops of the church, in things like the real presence, in all of these things, yes, absolutely. In terms of what this person seems to be getting at, which is a lot of the sort of creationism or young earth kind of what I would say is somewhat anti-science views, probably not, no. But then again, it's hard to tell. I mean, people like Saint Augustine famously wrote that if that he saw the creation chapters of Genesis as did Origen. And other early church fathers, many of them saw it as an allegorical sense to understanding it. Famously, they wrote things like, how could it be the third day or whatever when the sun was created? There were days before that. So I don't think that they ever held the sort of wooden literalistic reading of Genesis was frankly not something that was really widely sort of bandied about until really the fundamentalist kind of movement of the late 19th century in a lot of ways. I think mostly before that, before Charles Darwin and so forth, most people would have probably just accepted the idea in passing that, yeah, I guess the earth is really young and that's how it is. But it wasn't something that they saw as critical to their faith, I guess I would say, in the same way that kind of a lot of fundamentalists do today. Yeah.
Here's another one. I'm skipping it down a few. We had a lot of similar ones and all that. So, sure. Anglicanism, joint communion with the old Roman Catholic Church. Well, the old Catholics is like the PNCC, the Polish National Catholic Church, and all that. We're in communion with them, and we have shared holy orders through them. The argument is that hypothetically, holy orders would have been restored even if the Apostolic Curiae is true, because the alleged errors that are in the 1552 Ordinal are not in the 1662, the 1928 Ordinal, and all that sort of stuff. So that's one other argument. It's, for me, I don't even tend to bother with that argument. It's just sort of an additional one.
I've run across that before too. I mean, I didn't have time to get into it, but I've run across that. Yeah.
All right. Nathan, sincerely, would you be willing to accept Lutherans and Anglicans as truly Catholics? As truly Catholic?
Well, I'm not. It depends on what you mean by that. Yes, certainly in a sense. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly they're asking there. It goes back to these issues of what is it to be a baptized Christian? What is it to be versus what is it to be in formal communion with Rome? I mean, there are different issues there, but again, from a certain ecumenical sense, I think it is important to be able to say that any baptized believing Christian is a member of the body of Christ, as it's as it has to be understood. Yeah.
All right, this
So,
one's a bit.
I'm not sure if they're asking should I or would I or what they mean by that. Yeah. Or,
Well, if I were to go to your parish and I were to go try to receive communion, what would you do? I'm curious.
Well, it wouldn't be my place to do anything. I would not. I mean, I don't know.
Would you
I
talk
wouldn't go
with me
running,
afterwards?
screaming up there. No, no, no.
Uh,
Yeah, it's not my place.
If I said I'm going to go receive communion, what would you say?
I would reiterate. I think what I would probably reiterate what I think I said near the beginning of our conversation about that, which was just that what we understand as Catholics, what we understand it to mean is that you are in union, that you agree with everything that the church teaches, which goes to the issue. I mean, look, we've got, famously right now, the whole, President Biden and some other famous Catholics who are, a lot of people are saying you
Nancy
should
Pelosi?
not receive communion. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
I always find it funny that Pope Francis apparently thinks that it's okay for Biden to receive communion, but I can't. But okay.
I don't know that. We don't know that. That's just what Biden said. Who knows? Francis may, in fact, I suspect he may have just sat there nodding and not really even paying attention. And then
I think he's more intelligent than we tend to give him credit. Pope Francis, a bit more sneaky too. This one's a little bit meanish, maybe, or comes across that way. I'm not trying. That's how it is. Seems Rome makes up stuff to deny Anglican orders because the only reason they were denied is because of Anglophobia and the politics of the age. I will say, I was actually about to recommend a book that argues exactly that from a Roman Catholic. A Roman Catholic argues that. I'm going to see if I can find it here. Yep. The book is absolutely null and utterly void. John J. Hughes is the author, and he goes over the history of Apostolic Curiae, and he points out.
Write that down.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book. He goes over the sources, and he talks about how it is explicitly a political thing. It was Cardinal Vaughan pushing for it. He hated with a passion. He called us demonic and things like that. It just, it was
Okay.
pretty bad. And in fact, the council or the committee that was overseeing holy orders within Anglicanism for Apostolic Curiae, they were split. They like about half of them, actually I think there was even a slight majority, said no, Anglicans either have valid holy orders or they have they possibly have invalid holy orders. The definitively no was in the minority, and because of Vaughan and other influences, the Pope was like, okay, we're just going to say that they don't have, they absolutely null and utterly void holy orders.
I'll take a look at that book.
Good. Yeah, it's a good book. And again, he's a Roman Catholic. He actually died a few years ago, or maybe he's still alive. Okay, but he was an Anglican who became Roman, but he wrote this as a Roman Catholic. Let's see. Here's a good one. Nathan is fantastic. Please come on the show again. This ecumenical dialogue is what it will take to unite the church again. I actually would love to have the church reunited again. I think that's an important thing.
Oh, that was great. I'm glad that someone said. I was going to say that was one of my most important questions. I didn't get it. I forgot to ask you. Was just how do you see that as important? Because I do too. I mean, I read John,
united in truth. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. But I read John chapter 17 and think, I can't help but think Jesus really wants us to be together now.
Cool. Nathan, I would like to know about the Anglican rite in the Roman Church. If you have time to explain why they have that rite, is it for the same reason they have the Eastern rite? I would say that it's not. I would say it's actually a sheep stealing operation, but that's just me.
Hey now.
It's not a permanent thing. Oh, go ahead.
Is he referring to the Anglican ordinariate because I know there have been a number of Anglican clergy like yourself, but who have come in and become priests in the Catholic Church upon entry as well. I think they have that right. Frankly, I don't think that it's. I know it may look like sheep stealing to an extent. I think it's there partly because of the same desire for unity. The idea that we want to make as many inroads wherever and whenever we can to restoring oneness with the church. I think it's the same reason why, again, love him or hate him, Pope Francis has been so indefatigable with pursuing, as was his predecessor, with pursuing dialogue and talk with the Greek patriarch at Constantinople and other Orthodox patriarchs about what would it take, right? What would it take for unity to be restored? Yeah.
I see it as a sheep stealing thing. It is the reason is that it's not meant to be a permanent thing. It's supposed to be sort of a transition for them to go into the Roman Novus Ordo. It's not permanent like the Eastern Rite is. Any of the Eastern rites, like the Byzantine Catholics or anything like that. It's actually sort of supposed to stop. So to me, I'm just like it's the carrot
time.
dangling. Yeah,
at this time, that could change. I mean, again, that could change.
Oh, well, anything could change. The Pope could repent. So sorry. The 3 chapters were not monophysite; they were Nestorian. Sorry. Yeah, I get the history on those sorts of things confused a bit. Yes, they were Nestorian, and
that may be right. I'd have to look up.
Yeah, Pope Vigilius. Yeah, it's a fun little cluster.
When you get into from Arianism to Nestorianism to monophysitism to monothylitism to it really gets
All right, let's see. Why does Roman Catholic say there's a mystical? I don't know anything about that. Some of these I don't know. Let's see. I'm wanting to go through these. Okay, here's Father James. Just a note: Warfield held to Roman baptism. It was the other Presbyterians who opposed it, if I recall. From actually, my understanding is that Warfield was one of the ones who was the proponent against accepting baptisms done by Roman Catholics. Let's see. Doesn't adapt it. Let me see what else. Kind of going through these very quickly. Married several times. That might be it.
okay.
Let me see. Molinism. I have no comment. I love Molinism. Stop it. Was for the monophysite Pope. Sorry to keep. I'm just going through the very beginnings of this to see if there's a question for any of these, and I hate having dead air. Okay, let's go. There we go. Can development go from black to white, or black to white and then black again? How is that different from Watchtower light is getting brighter? I don't know about the Watchtower part, but this is one of the issues I have
the
with
Watchtower I think he's referring to Jehovah's Witnesses as well.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know what the light is getting brighter thing is talking about necessarily. But my question along this lines is, like, everyone accepts development of doctrine. No one denies that. In fact, that is an Anglican position because Newman was an Anglican when he made that argument. But in fact, I would say the reformers themselves saw development of doctrine. They didn't call it that exactly, but that was their argument essentially, that there was good development and bad development.
Well, a lot of people today don't accept it, though. You get the John MacArthur types who say if it wasn't in the Bible, God didn't say it, that sort of thing, right?
Well, but
become the latter-day view of some is the.
But that's not even. But even that is not what development of doctrine is, because development of doctrine would be the implications of Yeah. No one today, even Roman Catholics, would ever say that God is sort of speaking today in some sort of way, like. Even with something like a papal, an ex cathedra statement or something like that, that is not the Spirit speaking anew. That is sort of
revelation.
It's not. So there is no new revelation. So we would all agree on that, even with John MacArthur on that. But so he would still hold to development of doctrine with something like the Trinity. He would admit that Paul, if you were to say the word Trinity to him, he would probably be like, "What? What is that?" Kind of thing. But if you were to espouse the beliefs of the Trinity, he'd be like, "Yeah, that's what we're getting at." But I've never heard the word Trinity before. Like that's sort of the idea. Let's see. Okay, I guess this is a good one. In that same way, does Anglican confession function in a similar way to how confession was executed during COVID? We can't get spiritual confession. So maybe I'm missing part of that. But yeah, I guess there's not much to say with that. Sorry. I guess confession. So when people come to confession, the way we would do it is that, it's done in person. It can't be done through Zoom or something like that, I guess.
I take it for you. It is similar to what we would experience in a Catholic.
Yeah, it would have to be. It would have to be like in person. We couldn't do it just sort of through Zoom. Yeah.
Over the phone.
No. Here's a good one. Forcibly remove the heretics from the Church of England. Amen. And from the Episcopal Church too. Oh, this is good. There are a few of these. I'm in a devout Episcopal 1928 parish in wonderful diocese, so I haven't been forced out yet. I wonder what diocese that is. Yes. There are a lot of things. Hopefully, I'm not keeping you too long. If you have to go, let me know.
That's okay. I'm fine.
I guess here, have you read Mosley's response to Newman's development of doctrine? You can read it for free on the internet. I actually have to read Mosley's whole thing. I've read bits of Mosley, but I've not read. Mosley's really good. I like him a lot. But there's another one. I don't remember what it's called. But yeah, read Mosley.
No, I have not. No.
Okay, question. Best Pope of the 1900s?
For me, best. I guess that's for me. Best Pope of the 1900s. I guess. It's hard. My heart wants to say Pope St. John Paul II, but I might actually say Benedict XVI. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, he was 2002, so.
Or well, he was 2000. Yeah, you're right. He just missed it. He just
or not 2002, around that time.
It was early. Yeah. So I guess I would go with John Paul II. Yeah.
I mean, that would be the one I'd choose. I mean, he's popular. Yeah, it's JP2. Here, this is original Win Productions.
Eastern Europe through through Nazism.
Yeah. And I hate communism. So my mom's Cuban, so we are very anti-communist. It can be white wine as well, not just red. I thought so. That's what I thought. Yeah.
Is it? I don't even know. I'd have to check that. Yeah.
I would trust John Fisher 2.0. He's very learned as he's Roman.
Okay.
He's Roman Catholic. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Let's see. Information. Let's see. I've never heard of this one. What about the Malachi prophecy that some Roman Catholics would say refer to the ending of the papacy?
I don't know enough about that to comment. I've heard something about that, and actually, oddly enough, it was from my Baptist parents. I think my mother commented about something about Malachi and his prophecy. I'm just going to say I don't put a lot of stock in that any more than I do in any of the other sort of people who say, the world's ending in, 2008 or whenever. Yeah.
Yes.
No to this. I do not have a YouTube channel. Maybe I should start. I don't have one yet.
All right. Let's see. That might be. Oh, this is a good one for both of us. My charismatic family says I follow religion. They say I am caught up in tradition. How can I explain that we are upholding the tradition and that it doesn't make me any more holy?
I think you and I both agree on this. We get this because it's tough when you have a liturgical tradition you've embraced and they say this is all ritual. Right?
Yeah. So the comparison I make with people is that what would you say? I don't know if you're married or not, Nathan. Are you married if you don't mind? Okay. So what would you say to your wife, like before you got married, saying, I love you so much, girlfriend, that I don't want marriage to get in the way. I just want a relationship with you. I don't believe in this marriage stuff. Hopefully, if she were good and godly, she would slap you. That's what I think of when it comes to religion and relationship, where people are like, I don't believe in religion. I just believe in relationship. Well, if you are just having a relationship and you're not having a marriage or you're not having a religion, you are defining the boundaries as you see fit. Whereas within the marriage contract or the religion contract, you are submitting to boundaries that are set for you by God. I would say in both cases. So
yeah, I would just add to that. I think that particularly for the kind of the evangelical sort of very not liberal but kind of loose theology, sort of American Christianity that you tend to see a lot, where they go, it's a relationship with Jesus, that's it. I think that if you look to the Old Testament, you see there that God is intensely interested in how we worship. I mean, he prescribed, and there's no reason to think that all of that interest, just because we're in the new covenant, would just have disappeared. Well, now it's just a free-for-all. Just do whatever you want. I mean, these things give us structure. They give us order. The same way that we don't approach, our regular day in just a chaotic, haphazard fashion. I mean, we have an order, a schedule. I get up and I do this and I do that. I don't just go about my day in a chaotic state of non-decision. So why would worship be any? Why should that be different?
Amen. Agree fully. John Fisher, I've debated him, I think, twice on holy orders. The priestly ordination of the Novus Ordo does mention the office of the priest twice, in fact. Well, I will say, is it during the actual laying on of hands? That's the question. I don't think it is during the laying on of hands, because if by that standard, the ordinal mentions the priesthood multiple times, like I want to say a dozen times or so, and it's actually called the ordering of priests. So that's the issue.
I think I missed that question beforehand. What was that one about whiskey or?
Oh, I forgot to do that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Definitely we have to do this one. Drink of choice, Father James and Nathan, Scotch beer, whiskey. I am a cider guy. I love hard ciders. And when it comes to harder drinks, I like gin and tonic is a favorite of mine. I like Jameson as well.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you on the on ciders. I like a good ale or good cider, but in terms of the hard drinks, I like Crown Royal. I'm up here in Michigan. We're right next to the border. We're in the only place in the continental United States where you can look south and see Canada. So I like Crown Royal and a little ginger ale or something. It's good.
Nice. Does the ACNA have communion with the EPN? My understanding is that we do. I could be wrong on that, but I've not like looked into it or anything. But generally speaking, we do. It hasn't broken as far as I know. It's been maintained. Read Basil's commentaries on Genesis. Oh, that's still the same thing about that.
Yeah, okay.
6-day that's not a big debate for me. The 6-day creationism thing. America is an Anglican. Amen. That's right. See, a Cuban Anglican, very unique.
Yeah, that's.
Do I speak Spanish fluently? No, I don't speak it fluently. I need to brush up on it. I was brushing up on it earlier this year, but then I set it aside. I need to get back and pick it up again. Good evening, barely Protestant Reverend James, the Catholic biblicist. I don't know if I know you. I might know you. Let's see. Oh, this is for proud Anglicans. Have you considered charismatic? I'm not the biggest fan of charismatic sort of stuff, but that's just me.
I didn't know they had that in Anglicanism. We have that in Catholicism as well. There are kind of those charismatic groups. I'm also not it's not my style. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is your interpretation of Revelation 17:5? If you want to go through it, if you don't want to, that's fine. This is one of the last few.
Yeah, I could take a stab at it. I need to look it up though first. Actually, I don't have that off here. Revelation. What's my computer is being funny? Revelation 17:5. I'll read it from the King James. So.
There you go.
Oh boy! Oh, okay. It's somebody about the Babylon the Great. Well, most of Revelation. So clearly, this is someone implying that I guess that the mother of harlots and abomination of the earth is the Rome, the whore of Babylon. No, it is not, and there's no reason to think from anything in the Book of Revelation that it is there referring to the institution of the Catholic Church. Babylon was frequently most of Revelation that I would say that my general interpretation of Revelation is that the entire book was written for the most part, while it does have certain prophetic, the both and idea that there are certain prophetic aspects of it that are meant to come about again in the future, that its main thrust was written to Christians facing persecution from the Roman Empire at that time. And so, again, there's been much the oceans of ink spilled over what the beast is that rises out of the ocean and what kind of antichrist figure that is or would be. For the most part, that was meant to specifically refer to Nero, the emperor at that time, even if it might have prophetic aspects of some future antichrist figure. 17:5 is referring to essentially the Roman persecutors at the time of the Christian Church.
I'm a preterist, so I tend to hold to things like that myself. Are you there still? There you go. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So what were you saying?
I'm a preterist, so I tend to see a lot of what happens in Revelation as having already happened, that it was meant
Yeah.
for the first century, AD 70 and all that fun stuff. Yes, during laying on of hands, but you were talking about the Episcopal consecrations as well, John Fisher, which that would be another thing that we can get to. So I was probably accurate on the details then. So yeah. If I'm ever, yes, if you're ever, I'm not in San Francisco. I'm a little bit further away from the landing pad for the Fire and Brimstone, but yeah, I'm right outside of San Francisco. If anyone's ever in San Francisco, please, in the area, please let me know. I would love to hang out. Let's see. My daughter and I are learning Spanish Apostolic Creed, the Apostles' Creed. Oh, nice. That's great. I love it. I have a Spanish prayer book that I need to use more to brush up on my Spanish. Let's see. Oliver Cromwell was the Antichrist. He was an Antichrist. He's horrible. And thankfully, if I ever visit England, I hope to visit England again. But if I ever visit England again and find where he was buried, I want to make sure I spit there. They need a little spittoon there. Oliver Cromwell is evil. He's absolutely evil. Let's see. And that's it. So it looks like that's all the questions and points I wanted to bring up. Oh, wait, one here. Nice content, Padre. Thank you very much. But yeah, thank you for coming on. I think it was a good discussion. Yeah, if you ever want to come back, we can talk about having you come back and everything. But yeah.
All right. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks a lot. And thank you to, everyone that paid attention and hung in for this long. It was a good talk. I'd love to do it again sometime. Sure.
Awesome. Well, God bless. Hope you all have a good night. And I'm ending the broadcast.